Today on RPG Horror Stories, we have a player who refused to interact with anything in the game and then threw a temper tantrum at the entire party and DM for his bad play? Without further ado, let's get started. I'm mostly just typing this out to get it off my chest and thought this thread would be the best way to do it. I'm not the best at recalling things, so any apologies in advance. I've been playing a game with 4 others and a wonderfully sweet DM for about 2 years now. When we started off, there were 5 of us. We started things off with a typical, you meet in the tavern kind of stuff, and everyone was still slightly getting to know each other. Our GM is overly nervous because this is our first time running the game, and 2 of us, including myself, are also very nervous because this was our first time playing. I played a Tiefling Cleric, my other first-time friend played an ASMR Rogue. This group was divided amongst GM's different groups of friends. Rogue and I were from her hometown, while the other 3 were college buddies. The other 3 were a half-orc paladin, a halfling gunslinger, and a half-elf warlock. Paladin was a very nice, great player and helped us get comfortable with role-playing and starting out with combat. He was a fairly seasoned GM himself, and also helped our current GM get over some initial anxieties. Gunslinger was silly and chaotic as hell, but a lot of fun. The warlock, well, he was okay. I've seen people call this Edgelord stuff, and I think this counts. The warlock didn't really want to meet the rest of the group. He kept in a corner, holding onto this little jar of slime he called Larry. I remember my bubbly character going up to introduce herself to the warlock just to try and get the ball rolling, and I was worried he was already feeling left out, to which the warlock replied, "He stares at you emotionlessly while clutching onto his jar tightly." The moment we met the warlock in the jar of slime, however, the group latched the hell onto Larry because, hey, that's pretty funny and mysterious, right? The warlock went along with it, but didn't seem to like it too much. But it was the only thing we could really talk about with them to get an answer other than, "He creepily stares at you." Flash forward, and the group is starting to get along okay. All of them are pretty big assholes, but throughout the first arc, they were beginning to realize that they were a good team and could do a lot of damage together. Larry becomes a running joke. Thought it was mostly because the warlock wasn't really interacting as much. We all lived in different states, so we all played online. While everyone did their fair share of talking in-game and out-of-game, Warlock usually outright refused to interact. I thought this was because they were nervous to talk online, and I would have my cleric try to interact with them as much as possible, without much luck. This really discouraged me, and later I found the GM shared the same sentiments. I gotta stress, myself and the other players tried our hardest to make Warlock feel included and part of the team. I really don't like anyone feeling left out, especially with a game like this. And if this player had a story, I wanted it to be heard too. We all wrote backstories and poured a lot of lore into the game, which made it really engaging as we learned more and more about each other. At each opportunity, however, Warlock would turn it down every single time. Because of this, we latched even harder onto the jar of slime, Larry. Larry would interact with us in the tube, and all of the characters had different theories about him. The gunslinger would try to have regular conversations with Larry, and would later try to sneak food into the jar. Paladin kept casting divine sense on Larry, but not the warlock. Rogue kept asking Warlock questions about Larry because Warlock wouldn't answer anything about himself. We thought this was part of his character because of this. Warlock continued to not really speak, do cryptic mannerisms, and go their own way. Literally every single time we went somewhere in combat, they would run and hide and refuse to cast anything at all and would just cower. It was really frustrating to a certain degree, and the GM also seemed really confused by it and would ask every turn if they needed some time to think. GM would also hold space for them to talk and would ask if they wanted to do anything when they just went too quiet. Warlock's player, I might add, kind of intimidated Rogue and I, and would act a little cold towards us in and out of game. I never really understood why either, and was just too anxious to confront them about it, because I didn't know them all that well. One fateful game, my cleric in an RP conversation thought that Larry was the actual person and that the warlock was more of a puppet because the warlock didn't talk as much, and held on to it so tightly. Okay, by the way, I am so stealing that. That is an amazing character concept. Rogue and I laughed about this for a bit, as did the rest of the group. It was a funny exchange between characters. I remember the player not really being present when my cleric said this to the rogue, and was working on other things on camera while playing. We ended that game and the rogue signed off, and after, we were all just chatting and catching up, and then, at this moment, Warlock player unexpectedly interrupts us, screaming on video chat. They told us that we were bullying them, and was hurt that Larry and the Warlock became a joke in the game. They then proceeded to scream at us more, louder and louder each sentence, about how we were awful players, no one was playing correctly, and no one understood their character. We didn't give them enough time to play, no one paid attention to them on video camera, and no one heard what they said. It was rough. GM and I clam up because we don't do well with screaming, we all have our traumas, and both the other players just go silent. We basically let Warlock dish out their anger at us and then just leave, leaving us all in shocked silence. I shakily tell them that I'm going to log off and spend the night in bed, awake, mulling over what I could have done wrong. GM calls me the next day and we talk it out for a bit. I didn't know this, but apparently GM just let Warlock player yell at her on the regular. Out of game, apparently, the Warlock sits in silence to critique the GM's playing ability, and then would berate her away from everyone else for the rest of the week about what they did wrong. They treated this game like a test. I was fuming. I didn't think it was fair for the player to take advantage of our GM's kindness and care over how her players felt. I always wondered why at the end of each game, GM would apologize over and over and over about the game, even if we had fun. I knew her to be an anxious person, but I think this just added on to it. I can't even imagine what that person was like when they went to college together. I encouraged GM to email Warlock and tell them that they would have to permanently leave the game, and I threatened to leave if they didn't. I wasn't going to tolerate someone treating anyone in the group like that. I found it so unfair and so sudden. We've been playing for 2 years without Warlock, and it's been incredible. GM's confidence grew, and they run a great game with rich lore and fun combat. I'm really proud of them, and so are the players. I don't think about this much anymore, but reading some of these stories made me want to share my own. I know mine's not as crazy. I beg to disagree, but it's nice to type it out. TLDR. Warlock Edgelord emotionally abused party and GM in outbursts after taking no effort to play the game or interact with anyone. Blames it all on us for their bad playing. Like usual in this series, there is a lot going on here, so I'll try to just cover topics that I haven't covered extensively before, but one of the main proponents of this story is that a player is not interacting much with the game. Now, of course, there is a crazy, insane, twisted reason why the player isn't interacting with the game, but that's a whole different thing we'll cover in a second. So, when you have a player who isn't interacting with the game, talk to them outside the game, as well as trying to get them to interact in the game. Now, the first one. Why talk to them outside the game? Well, you don't know why they're doing what they're doing. They could be just nervous, or maybe they just want to take a step back. I have advised in the past that players, new players, watch other role players and try to learn from that. Some people just want to learn for a little bit before jumping in, so maybe a quiet player is just trying to sit back and learn from more experienced players. I think that is okay. if a player is just nervous, well, there are a bunch of things you can do to help invite them in. I've linked this video in the past, but in the description, I'll link a video by Ginny D about how to invite in more nervous role players. And if you're a more nervous role player yourself, there's another video, also by Ginny D, that covers how to engage more with the game. Okay, now to the plot twist, that the player, this warlock, is using the game as a sort of way to judge the DM and is yelling at her outside of the game. Okay, this is obviously completely unacceptable. DMs, GMs, whatever, should take criticism. I ask for criticism after every single one of my games. However, this is not an acceptable way to deliver criticism if you're a player who is unhappy with your game. If you're unhappy with the way things are going, you don't pull your GM aside after every single game to berate them about what they did wrong. That is not a way to deliver criticism in almost every situation, and not just D&D, but in life in general. It is a great way for your criticism to either be ignored or not regarded in full, because, quite frankly, you're acting like a dick. Also, good on OP for standing up for their friend. That is really important. There's this sort of notion that the DM is supposed to be the adult at the table, and that's often what the DM ends up being. However, in a situation like this, everyone at the table is a person. Everyone has the capability of standing up and saying, no, this will not continue. So good on the OP for doing that. That's a culture that should be enforced at every table. You're all people who are playing this game together. It's not just the DM who's leading it. If you see something wrong, do what OP did. Stand up and say something. Okay. That is going to wrap it up for today. If you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories, then please do hit that like button. If you want to see more episodes of this series, as well as my other series, Tabletop Tavern Tips, then please do hit that subscribe button. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go to the comments down below. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.